Hi, I'm Alan Heary, and I'm so delighted to be asked in to speak to you guys today from Zevo Health. And today's topics, we're going to talk about working remotely. Today we're going to look at the advantages of working remotely. We're going to look at some of the challenges of working remotely, and I'm going to give you 7 steps that you can actually put in place, or 7 things that you can put in place to make it easier for you to work remotely. So firstly, what is remote working? Well, remote working is basically anywhere outside of your company. So being able to bring it at home or being able to bring it on a holiday with you, which is not something I would ever suggest. But it does mean that you can basically work from anywhere. It doesn't have to be your desk. And there are lots of advantages to it. There are some disadvantages, but there are certainly many advantages to it. The first advantage is that you can basically take it anywhere. One of my favorite things to do is to be able to travel to, I might go to Mallorca and I might spend 2 weeks over there, and I decide that I'm going to do what I call deep work. There's actually a brilliant book written about this exact topic, so deep work if you look it up. But deep work is about taking what you do, a certain project that you might have or a certain amount of work, and you plan it out and you say, I'm just going to delve into that. And so one of the things that I like to do is go away for a week or 2 weeks and basically just work on that. But I am working remotely, I am away from my office, but it does mean that I'm able to do it without any distractions. So one of the advantages to it is that you can basically take your work anywhere. The second advantage is time. So your time can be quite flexible. It's up to you how much time you spend getting something done. Remember, I tend to talk, if you've ever seen me speak before on this, you'll hear me talk about managing energy and not time. So it's how much energy you have in a day. And I think as long as you set out some to-do lists, some things that you must get done throughout that day, if you achieve those, you're doing exceptionally well. So it's not about how much time you spend on it, it's about getting that work done. So working remotely means that you do have that flexibility of time to be able to sit down with your list and to work out when you're going to get it done throughout the day. So you can do some workload and also build in some recovery throughout the day. And I think that is something that's hugely advantageous. Working remotely, I find, there tends to be less distractions. Sometimes if you're working in an office environment, you can get distracted by other people coming up and asking you questions and asking you to do things, or you'll get pings coming in from different people to do stuff, and it can be very distracting. And I think when you work remotely, it allows you in a sense to switch off from other things that are happening. It allows you to say, I am here, this is my space, and you can almost put it on a timer and say, for the next 40 minutes or 1 hour or 90 minutes, I'm going to work on X and I'm going to get that done. So it certainly can cut down on the distractions. I think that is one of the best advantages I find from it. And so what we tend to find is there can be an increase in productivity. The people get more done. So it definitely can help in that way. Now, it takes a little bit of courage sometimes to work remotely, to actually take that step. And when I say courage, here's what I mean. I have a manager of a company that I'm working with came to me recently and said, I really want to create a culture, an environment within the company or within my team within this company that if they want to work from home, they can do that as long as they get stuff done. Then I don't have an issue with that. And I want them to be able to do that. It means that they can go home, they can do other little things if they want, but they can get their work done at the same time. So I want them to do that. So I asked her a very simple question. How much time on a weekly basis do you spend working from home? Which, well, obviously I can't. But why? And so she started to go through some of the things that she thought were getting in the way. We made a list of them and ticked those off and put them one side and said, well, actually, the only reason why you're not working remotely is because at the moment you think that the culture is that you can't actually work remotely. So it takes a certain level of courage. Now, in order for her team to be able to do this, they need a leader that will take hand on it. So she decided then that she was going to work at least one day remotely. And so people do what others do, not what they say. Do this little exercise for me. Take your thumb and put it up in the air. Come on, humour me. Put your thumb up in the air. Put your finger out in front. Now stick your finger and thumb together really tightly, really tightly. Good. Now put it on your chin. Good. But if you find that you suddenly realize that this is actually your chin and not this, then you'll understand one very important thing. People tend to go by what others do and not what they say. So take that into the work environment with you. Learn to understand that if you really want to change environment, if you really want to change the culture, it starts with the leadership. And each person within a team, within the company, has to take responsibility for themselves. And I think this is key. Sometimes we look to leaders and only to leaders for them to give us direction. However, I believe that everybody within a team should take responsibility. So there are some great advantages to working remotely. One, you can do it anywhere. Two, you can put as much time or as little time into it as long as you get the work done as possible. Three, there tends to be less distractions from working remotely. And then finally, there's that increase of productivity that comes from all of those things. Now, there are some challenges to working remotely. So there's four that I want to look at. The first tends to be communication. There can be a breakdown sometimes in communication when you're not actually in the office or when you're not actually in the company. So when you're only doing things through email or through Messenger, there can be a breakdown in communication. So that is certainly one of the challenges. But we'll look at ways of being able to overcome that. The second challenge that we can face is raising issues. So if there's an issue, if there's conflict in some way, how do we do that? If we're not actually in the same company as the team manager or the team leader, how do we do that? And so that can be a challenge. Building relationships. You see, it's easier to build relationships in some ways when you're going down to the water cooler and you're speaking to people and you're chatting to people about their life and what's happening. It can be easier when you see people face to face on a daily basis. Not so easy when you're working remotely or if you're working part of a virtual team, in a sense where you have people all over the world working on one team coming together for one project. So building those relationships can be a little bit of a challenge, but there are ways of overcoming it. Sometimes we get a feeling of isolation that can also come with working remotely because, again, you don't feel part of the team. When we walk into an environment where everybody else is around, we're all doing this together, it can feel great. But some people don't have that. And so when you're working on a virtual team or working remotely, there can be that feeling of isolation. And again, there are certain things that we can do to overcome that. Now, my work involves working with sport at a high level. And so people talk to me about virtual teams in sport. Do we really get virtual teams in sport? Well, the answer is yes, we do. If you look at something, we have Gaelic football in Ireland. And Gaelic football at the under 20 level, we have almost a virtual team with that. They may only get together once a week or once every couple of weeks to train as a county. But in the meantime, they're in their colleges. They have maybe some work on the sides that they have to do. So they could be playing with the college, they'll play with their club, and then we're trying to get them together for county. And one of the issues that we have in sport is how do you know that the team that you have are actually doing the training that you've set out for them on that weekly basis? So again, there are challenges within sport, but some of the things that we do in sport, we can bring directly across the business. So I'm going to give you 7 steps that you can take in order to be able to work remotely or as part of a virtual team, and I think that will improve. So number 1 is decide on how you're going to communicate. Are you going to communicate just through app? Are you going to communicate through emails? Some people find it much more effective if you're going to use a system like Skype or Zoom, conferencing, teleconferencing. What way you're going to communicate? There are certain times that it's good to communicate just by an email or just by an instant message, but there are other times where you definitely 100% need to be speaking to the individual rather than just sending them a message. So decide on how you're going to communicate. And also, it's really interesting to find out if you are working within a team, how people like to get their communication. Some people, I'm very auditory. In other words, I love sound. I love speaking to somebody. I like to hear the information being given to me. Where other people, they don't really need to hear that. They don't need to talk to somebody. A quick email to them will actually work. It takes me much longer to write an email sometimes than it does for me to pick up a phone and just have a chat with them and sort it out. So you get to work out which communication people like. And so once you have that, I think that can make a huge difference to you. So number one on the list is always decide on what type of communication you're going to do, with who and how. Number two, quite often we don't communicate enough. Now, there are times when we should be communicating a hell of a lot more, but there are times when we don't communicate enough. And what happens sometimes is somebody will say, well, I didn't get an email from John in a while, or I didn't get a call from Mary in a while. You know what? You must take responsibility. I always say to people that communication is a two-way thing. You know, phones are a two-way communication device. So take responsibility sometimes, that if you find that you suddenly think, wow, somebody hasn't contacted me, pick up the phone or send them an email, prompt them, get them to come back to you. So just remember that. Number two is always take responsibility for your own communication. Number three on my list, should you use emojis? Now, some people love them, some people hate them. I think emojis work. Personally, with a lot of the teams that I've worked with, we like the emojis within Messenger, and the reason why we like the emojis when we're messaging one another is because sometimes things can get lost in translation. So with different cultures across the board, so if you are working as part of a virtual team where you're working with different people from around the world, I'll always say go back to step number one and decide how you're going to communicate, and also learn about the culture of different people and in what way they communicate. So with emojis can be used quite well if you say something but you put a smiley face on the end of it. It stops people from taking it up in a bad way sometimes. Limited, but certainly it can be used. So I would put a question mark behind that sometimes, but I certainly know that with the teams that I work with, they tend to work quite well. Number four, learn to manage your emotions. And when I mean learn to manage your emotions, what I'm talking about is sometimes again somebody will not reply to us straight away, and so we have this little thing going on in our heads and we create this whole scenario of what's happening and maybe why they're not talking to us and why we didn't get the email. Manage your emotions. So rather than take it only from the emotional side, look at it from a logical part as well. There's a brilliant book called The Chimp Paradox by Steve Peters, and he talks about how the brain is split into three. I can't go into great detail on this today. I will say that there are three parts to the mind, really. There's the part that's the computer part, which is your habits and your routines, that when you go to do something, it's set up for you. The second part is the logical part of your mind. The logical part of your mind is the human part. So the human part, the logical part, is the part that when somebody hasn't emailed you in a while, they go, gosh, I hope nothing's wrong. I must send them an email to see how they are. And then you have the emotional part, and the emotional part he calls the chimp. So basically chimps are looking for two things. One is things that there's an opportunity, or the second is a threat. And if it's a threat to the ego, we still let our emotions run wild. So I would say to you, learn to manage your chimp, or learn to manage the emotions. So work on looking at how we're more logical rather than the emotional side. Number five, if there is an issue, don't let it slide. So if you're in a virtual team and somebody has said something, or there's something not working out the way that you want it to work out, don't let it just slide. Communicate with them. I would always say as well that if you have an issue to deal with somebody with an issue, email is not always the best way. Sometimes speaking to somebody. So if you're given bad news, never give anyone bad news on a text message. That causes all types of chaos. So no bad news by text message, no bad news really by email. Look at actually speaking to them, even if it's a conference call. Definitely one-to-one on that is far better than any email or text message. But do not let it slide. Number six, make an effort to build trust. And the way that I like to look at building trust, especially with remote teams or working in a virtual team, is through the RCR. Make sure that you're reliable, make sure that you're consistent, and make sure that you respond. So reliability. So when you're reliable, when you say you're going to do something and you do it, that's what builds trust. Those with integrity do what they say they're going to do. Everyone else makes excuses. And that's something that I try to live by. The consistency, be consistent about it. So not only are you being reliable, but if you're saying that you're going to be communicating with the team, be consistent with that communication, and then respond. Now, when I say respond, I don't mean it has to be responded to immediately when an email comes in. That's not what I'm talking about. But at least have it there that it's not going to stretch out too long. That even if you just send an email back saying, I got your email, I will look into it. So that responsiveness makes a big difference, and it's what allows us to build trust really quickly. And again, it's all about you taking responsibility. It's your responsibility to help others to be able to build that trust and bond with you, even if you're in a virtual team or you're working remotely. And finally, we talked about one of the disadvantages is feeling isolated, feeling on our own. I always say to people, be visible, make yourself seen. Even if there are different communication apps that we can use. Oh my God, I'm on so many, all the different teams I work with. You've got everything from Viper, Messenger, the WhatsApp. The big one for business is Slack. So I've got 4 or 5 teams that are all on Slack. What I would say with that is, always make yourself visible. So now and again, I'll just go on and see how everybody is doing. So they know I'm still there. They know I'm still part of the team. So make yourself visible. So in summary, the 7-step plan again. Number 1, decide on what way you're going to communicate, how you're going to do it. So learn about people and learn how they want to communicate and how they want to get the information from you or to be able to share the information. 2, take responsibility for communication. Always remember that communication is a two-way thing. So if you're not getting something coming to you, you have to communicate with them. Number 3, use emojis if you find that they help, and a lot of people do. Number 4, learn to manage that little chimp inside or the emotions that we have going with it. Number 5, don't let things slide. So make sure you deal with things as they're happening. Number 6, make the extra effort. Remember the RCR. Be reliable, be consistent, and be responsive. And finally, number 7, stay visible. Make sure that people actually know you're there. You're not just working on your own. You're still part of a team, even if it is a virtual team. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me on this webinar. And again, a huge thank you to Zevo Health with this. And, best of luck. Follow the plan. Away you go.